Mike was a quiet man with a kind heart. He had lived a simple life, working as a school custodian for over 30 years in a small town in Kansas. Every day, he worked hard to keep the school clean, helping children learn in a safe place. Now that he was retired, Mike looked forward to peaceful days by the lake near his new home. He had always loved fishing, the calm, the fresh air, and the chance to think. When Mike found the house by the lake, he knew it was perfect. The water stretched out like a mirror, reflecting the blue sky and fluffy white clouds. Trees lined the shore, and in the summer, children would play near the water while families enjoyed picnics. The neighborhood was quiet, and everyone seemed friendly. Mike's favorite thing to do was sit on the wooden dock outside his house, casting his fishing line into the water. He loved the peaceful feeling of waiting for a fish to bite. Sometimes, he talked to neighbors walking by. Sometimes, he just sat quietly and listened to the birds. One sunny morning, Mike went to check his mailbox. Inside was a letter with the name Homeowners Association printed on the envelope. Mike had heard about the HOA when he bought his house but hadn't thought much about it. He opened the letter and began to read. His eyes grew wide with surprise. The letter said Mike owed a $3,500 fine. The reason? He was fishing in the lake without permission. The HOA said the lake was HOA-managed property, and fishing was not allowed. They said he had broken the rules and must pay the fine immediately. Mike could not believe it. He looked out at the lake, the same lake where he had spent many happy hours. No one had ever told him that fishing was forbidden. When he bought the house, the agent told him the lake was a beautiful part of the community, a place for everyone to enjoy. Kids swam there, families gathered on the shore, and neighbors greeted each other warmly. How could fishing suddenly be a problem? Feeling confused and upset, Mike decided to visit the HOA office. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe someone could explain it to him. The office was in a small building not far from the lake. When Mike walked in, he saw Cheryl, the HOA president. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a serious expression. She greeted Mike with a polite but cold smile. Mike showed her the letter and said, "I don't understand. I've been fishing here for months. No one ever said it was against the rules." Cheryl folded her arms and replied, "The rules are clear. Fishing without a permit is not allowed on HOA property. The fine is for breaking that rule." Mike shook his head. "But why now? Why didn't anyone tell me before?" Cheryl's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We have to treat everyone the same. The bylaws don't allow fishing unless you have permission from the board." Mike felt a mix of sadness and frustration. He had moved here to find peace, not problems. He tried to explain how important the lake was to him and the neighbors. "We all want a peaceful community," Cheryl said firmly. "But rules are rules." Mike left the office with the fine notice still in his hand. As he walked back to his house, he felt a heavy weight in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt powerless. At home, Mike sat on his porch and stared at the lake. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light on the water. The birds were quiet, and the breeze was soft. He thought about the fine, the rules, and the quiet anger he felt inside. He had spent his life working hard, following rules, and helping others. Now, a simple joy like fishing had turned into a battle. Mike whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time I read those bylaws too." He pulled out a notebook and pen. Over the next few days, he spent time learning about the HOA, its rules, and the board members. The more he read, the more he saw how complicated the rules were and how little they seemed to care about the people who lived in the neighborhood. But Mike was not a man to give up easily. He wanted to protect his home, his lake, and the peace he had found. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of his fight. Mike spent the next few days reading everything he could find about the homeowners association. He read the bylaws, the rules about the lake, and the letters the HOA sent to neighbors. The papers were full of long sentences and difficult words, but Mike was determined to understand. He wanted to know why he was being treated like a criminal for fishing in a place that had always felt like home. One afternoon, Mike visited the local library to use the computer. He typed HOA laws and property rights. He found stories of other people who had trouble with their HOAs, and how some HOAs sometimes made unfair rules. Mike took notes and printed important pages. Back at home, he sat on his porch again, looking at the calm lake. "This isn't just about fishing," he said quietly. "It's about standing up for what's right." Mike decided he could not pay the fine without a fight. $3,500 was a lot of money for him, especially after retiring on a small pension. He thought about his neighbors. Maybe they felt the same way but were too afraid to speak up. He started talking to people. One by one, he knocked on neighbors' doors, holding a copy of the fine letter. Some people smiled politely and said, "That's too bad," but didn't want to talk much. Others nodded and told Mike stories about their own little struggles with the HOA. The rules were strict, and the board was hard to change. Then Mike met Susan. Susan was a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. When Mike showed her the fine, her eyes widened. "That's unfair," Susan said. "You should not be fined for fishing here. The lake is part of our community." Susan smiled kindly and said, "I've always thought the HOA was too strict. But no one wants to cause problems. They just want to enjoy their homes." Together, Mike and Susan made a plan. They would talk to more neighbors and see if anyone else wanted to stand up to the HOA. If enough people joined, maybe they could change the rules. The next weekend, Mike and Susan organized a small meeting at Mike's house. They invited a few neighbors. Some brought coffee, others brought stories. At the meeting, Mike shared what he had learned about the bylaws and the HOA's responsibilities. Susan talked about how the lake had always been a place for the community, not just a private resource. Everyone agreed, the fine was too high, and the fishing rule was unfair. But there was a problem. The HOA board, led by Cheryl, was powerful and did not like to be challenged. "I heard they meet every month in the community hall," said Mr. Thompson, a retired mechanic. "We can go to the next meeting and speak up." Mike felt nervous but hopeful. "We have to try," he said. Over the next days, Mike and Susan worked together to prepare for the meeting. They wrote down their concerns and questions. Mike even made copies of the fine letter and some of the bylaws for everyone to bring. Finally, the night of the HOA meeting arrived. The community hall was crowded with neighbors. Some faces were familiar, others were not. Cheryl sat at the front, her expression calm but firm. When it was time for public comments, Mike stood up. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was clear. "I want to speak about the fishing fine I received," he said. "I believe the rule is unfair, and the fine is too high. The lake belongs to all of us, and fishing is a part of our community life." Some neighbors nodded in agreement. A few whispered quietly to each other. Cheryl responded carefully. "The rules are made to protect property values and safety. We must enforce them equally. But many of us didn't know fishing was not allowed, Mike said. We have fished here for years without problems. The room became quiet. For the first time, some neighbors started to speak up, sharing their thoughts and stories. Susan stood and said, "We want to work with the HOA. But we need clearer rules and fair treatment." The meeting lasted late into the evening. While Cheryl and the board listened, they did not make any promises. After the meeting, Mike felt tired but proud. For the first time, people were talking openly about their concerns. They were no longer afraid. On the way home, Susan said, "You did good, Mike. This is just the start." Mike looked at the lake again, the moonlight shining softly on the water. He knew the fight would be long. But he was ready. After the long HOA meeting, Mike felt a mix of emotions. He was hopeful because neighbors finally spoke up. But he also felt worried. The board had not agreed to change anything yet, and the $3,500 fine still hung over his head like a dark cloud. Still, Mike was determined not to give up. Over the next few days, he talked more with Susan and some other neighbors who had come to the meeting. They shared stories about their lives, their families, and why the lake was so important to them. It was clear that the lake was more than just water, it was a place of memories, laughter, and peace. One morning, Mike decided to take a walk near the dam at the far end of the lake. He had always admired the dam but had never paid much attention to it. As he walked, he saw a small wooden sign near the base of the dam. It said something about ownership, but the words were faded and hard to read. Curious, Mike took a picture with his phone and later tried to find more information online. To his surprise, he discovered something he never expected. The dam was not owned by the HOA. It was owned by the community, but the actual property belonged to a small private company. The HOA only had permission to use the water for their neighborhood. This discovery changed everything. Mike realized that the HOA might not have full control over the lake and water like they claimed. If he could find out who owned the dam and the water rights, maybe he could do something to help the community. He shared this news with Susan. "We need to learn more," Susan said. "If the HOA doesn't really own the water, maybe they can't stop us from using the lake as we have before." Mike contacted the county records office and asked for information about the dam and water rights. It took some time, but finally, he got the official papers. The dam was owned by a company called Green Valley Waterworks, which had been in business for decades but was little known to most residents. Mike's mind raced. What if the community could buy the dam? That way, the neighbors would have control over the lake and the water, not the HOA. But buying a dam sounded like a big and expensive idea. Mike didn't have that kind of money. Still, he wanted to learn more. One afternoon, Mike called the phone number listed for Green Valley Waterworks. A man named Tom answered. "Hello, this is Mike from Lakeside Neighborhood. I'm interested in learning about the dam and water rights," Mike said. Tom was friendly and answered questions carefully. He explained that the company had owned the dam for years but was not very involved with the community. They sold water to the neighborhood through the HOA. Mike asked, would the company ever consider selling the dam? Tom paused, then said, "Maybe. It depends on the price and the buyer." Mike felt a spark of hope. He talked to Susan and a few neighbors about the idea of buying the dam. Some thought it was impossible, but others liked the idea of owning the water rights themselves. Over the next week, Mike started to ask around for advice. He called a local lawyer named Miss Brown, who was known for helping communities with property issues. Miss Brown listened carefully to Mike's story and said, "This is an unusual situation, but it might be possible. You would need to organize your neighbors, raise funds, and make a formal offer to the company." Mike felt a little overwhelmed but excited. He knew the road ahead would be hard, but the idea of protecting the lake for everyone gave him new energy. Meanwhile, the HOA board, especially Cheryl, noticed that Mike was becoming a bigger problem. He was no longer quiet or afraid. Cheryl called Mike to the HOA office again. "Mike, you are causing unrest," Cheryl said with a cold voice. "I suggest you stop this nonsense before things get worse." Mike looked her in the eye. "I just want what's fair for all of us. The lake belongs to the community, not just the HOA board." Cheryl frowned but said nothing more. As Mike left the office, he felt proud. For the first time in years, he was standing up for himself and his neighbors. That night, Mike sat on his dock and looked at the shining lake. He thought about the future, about fighting not just for himself, but for the whole neighborhood. "This lake is more than just water," he whispered. "It's our home." The idea of buying the dam was growing bigger in Mike's mind every day. It felt like a mountain to climb, but also a way to protect the lake and the community he loved. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed everyone's support. Mike and Susan decided to organize a neighborhood meeting again, but this time, with a clear goal, to talk about buying the dam and taking control of their water. They worked together to make flyers, inviting every homeowner in the neighborhood. Mike even went door to door, explaining why the idea was important. At first, some people were confused or worried. "Buying a dam," one neighbor said, scratching his head. "That sounds too expensive. Can we even do that?" Mike smiled and said, "We don't know yet how much it will cost, but if we come together, we have a chance. Right now, the HOA controls the lake and water, and that's causing problems. If we own the dam, we can make fair rules for everyone." On the evening of the meeting, the community hall filled slowly. Some faces were new, some were familiar. Mike felt nervous, but Susan stood next to him and gave a quiet nod of encouragement. Mike began, "Thank you all for coming. We all love this lake and this neighborhood. Recently, I found out that the dam at the end of the lake is owned by a company, not by us or the HOA. That means the HOA controls the water because they have permission from that company." He paused, letting the information sink in. "The HOA has made rules that many of us don't agree with, like the fishing fine I received. But if we can buy the dam and own the water rights, we can protect our lake and make fair rules together." Some neighbors looked interested, others skeptical. Susan then shared stories of families who had enjoyed the lake for years, fishing, swimming, and making memories. "Imagine a lake where we all have a voice," Susan said softly. "Where our kids can fish without fear, and where the community can grow stronger." Questions came from the audience. "How much will it cost?" asked Mr. Daniels, an elderly man with a kind face. "We don't know exactly," Mike replied honestly. "But we will find out by talking with the company and professionals. Then, we will decide if it's possible." Another neighbor, Mrs. Lee, said, "What if the company doesn't want to sell?" "Then we keep talking," Mike said firmly. "But at least we will try. We can't keep living under rules that don't feel right." As the meeting ended, many neighbors stayed to talk. Some offered to help Mike and Susan with the project. Others said they would spread the word. Mike felt hopeful. For the first time, the community seemed ready to stand together. Over the next few weeks, Mike and Susan worked hard. They formed a small group of neighbors who wanted to help. They called themselves the Lake Protectors. Mike contacted the company that owned the dam again and asked for a meeting with the owner, Mr. Collins. When the day came, Mike, Susan, and two other neighbors drove to a small office where Mr. Collins waited. Mr. Collins was a friendly man in his 60s. He listened carefully as Mike explained their plan. "We want to buy the dam to protect the lake and give control back to the community," Mike said. Mr. Collins nodded. "I understand. Many companies don't think about the people who live near their properties. I'm open to selling if the price is right." Mike asked, "Can you give us a price?" Mr. Collins smiled. "It's not a small number. But I want to help the community. If you can raise the money, we can talk." Mike thanked him and left the office feeling both excited and worried. Back in the neighborhood, the Lake Protectors started planning how to raise the money. They talked about holding fundraisers, bake sales, car washes, and community events. Susan suggested a fishing tournament to bring people together and celebrate the lake. Mike liked the idea. "We can show everyone how much the lake means to us." At the same time, Mike kept pushing the HOA board to listen to the community's concerns. He sent letters and attended meetings, always polite but firm. Cheryl, the HOA president, was not happy. She called Mike again. "You're making trouble," she warned. "The HOA has rules, and you need to follow them." Mike replied calmly, "I'm only trying to help the neighborhood." Cheryl shook her head but said nothing more. One evening, as Mike sat on his dock watching the sunset, Susan joined him. "We're making progress," she said. "Neighbors are starting to believe." Mike smiled. "It's not just about the dam or the fishing anymore. It's about community." Susan nodded. "Exactly. We're standing up for what we believe in." Mike looked at the calm water, feeling a new kind of peace. The fight was still ahead, but now, he knew they were not alone. The weeks after the neighborhood meeting passed quickly. The Lake Protectors worked hard, organizing fundraisers and spreading the word about their goal to buy the dam and protect the lake. Mike was surprised by how many people joined the effort. Families, retirees, and even younger neighbors showed up, ready to help. One sunny Saturday, the neighborhood held its first big fundraiser, a fishing tournament. It was a chance for everyone to come together and celebrate the lake they all loved. Early that morning, Mike arrived at the dock with his fishing gear and a hopeful heart. The community hall was buzzing with excitement. Tables were filled with homemade snacks, lemonade, and prizes donated by local stores. Children ran around laughing, while neighbors greeted each other warmly. Susan stood nearby, organizing volunteers and making sure everything ran smoothly. As the tournament began, Mike smiled watching kids learning how to cast their lines. It reminded him why he had fought so hard, not just for himself, but for the joy the lake brought to everyone. During the event, Mike talked with many neighbors, answering questions about the dam and their plans. Most people seemed supportive, but some still worried about the cost and the challenges ahead. Mr. Daniels, the elderly man from the last meeting, approached Mike. "Son, you've done a good thing bringing us together. But how will you raise enough money?" Mike nodded. "It won't be easy, but if everyone gives what they can, we'll get closer." Susan joined them and added, "It's about community. We're all in this together." The tournament ended with laughter and stories shared over dinner. Though no one caught the biggest fish, the real prize was hope. The next challenge was the HOA. Cheryl and the board had noticed the growing movement against them. At their next monthly meeting, Cheryl spoke firmly. "We must stop this before it gets out of control," she said. "Mike and his group are trying to take control away from the HOA." The board agreed to tighten the rules even more and to keep enforcing fines strictly. Mike heard about the new rules and felt frustration rising. But he did not give up. At the next HOA meeting, Mike stood up again to speak. "We want to work with the HOA," he said calmly. "We want fairness and respect. The lake belongs to all of us." Cheryl shot back, "The rules are for safety and property value. You must follow them." Some neighbors nodded, but others looked uncertain. Mike knew the fight was far from over. One day, Mike received a letter from Mr. Collins, the dam's owner. The letter said the company was willing to negotiate a sale, but only if the community could raise a large deposit within the next 3 months. The price was high, much more than Mike expected. Mike shared the news at a lake protectors meeting. "We have a deadline," Mike said. "If we want to save our lake, we must act fast." Susan looked worried but determined. "We'll do whatever it takes." The group planned more fundraisers, yard sales, concerts, and even a charity dinner. Mike visited local businesses to ask for support. Slowly, the community's efforts added up. One evening, as Mike walked home, he saw Cheryl waiting near the lake. "Mike," she said quietly, "I want to talk." Mike was surprised but listened. "I've seen how much people care about this place," Cheryl said. "Maybe we've been too strict. Maybe there is a better way." Mike nodded. "We want to work together, not fight." Cheryl looked at the lake. "Let's try. For the community." Mike smiled. "That's all I've ever wanted." With Cheryl's new attitude, things started to change. The HOA agreed to pause fines and listen to community ideas. Mike and the lake protectors worked with the board to plan the future of the lake. The fundraisers continued, and the community grew stronger. On the last day of the deadline, Mike gathered the money raised. Together, the neighbors made an offer to Mr. Collins. Weeks later, Mike received a call. The dam was theirs. That night, the neighborhood gathered by the lake. They celebrated not just the dam, but their victory as a community. Mike stood on his dock, looking at the shining water. He thought of the long fight, the doubts, and the hope that never faded. "This lake is ours," he whispered. "And so is our future." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. The community had bought the dam. Mike could hardly believe it. After months of hard work, late nights, and endless meetings, their dream was finally real. The lake was theirs. The very next day, Mike and the lake protectors gathered by the dam. The sun was shining bright, and the water sparkled under the blue sky. Children played near the shore, and neighbors smiled with pride. Mike looked around and felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't just about owning the dam, it was about taking care of a place that held their memories, hopes, and future. Susan clapped her hands and said, "Now, we can make sure this lake is a place for everyone." The lake protectors started planning new rules, simple, fair, and made by the people who lived there. They wanted everyone to enjoy fishing, swimming, and the beautiful nature around the lake. One of their first decisions was to cancel the unfair fishing fines. Mike remembered how hard it had been to fight that $3,500 fine. Now, fishing was welcome again, and everyone could relax by the water without fear. They also created a plan to keep the lake clean and safe. Volunteers signed up to pick up trash, plant trees, and watch over the water. Mike was proud to see so many people, young and old, working together. At the same time, the relationship between the community and the HOA began to change. Cheryl, the HOA president, now worked with Mike and the lake protectors instead of against them. She had learned that listening to neighbors brought more peace than strict rules and fines. At one meeting, Cheryl said, "I'm sorry for the way things were before. We want to work with you." Mike nodded. "Thank you, Cheryl. It's never too late to do the right thing." One afternoon, Mike was fishing on his dock when a small boy named Tommy came by. Tommy's family had just moved into the neighborhood. "Can you teach me to fish?" Tommy asked shyly. Mike smiled. "Of course." As they sat by the lake, Mike showed Tommy how to cast a line and be patient. Tommy listened carefully, his eyes full of wonder. "It's peaceful, isn't it?" Mike said. Tommy nodded. "I think this lake is magic." Mike laughed. "It is, in a way. It brings people together." Weeks passed, and the neighborhood became more connected than ever. Families had picnics by the water. Children played safely. Neighbors helped each other with small repairs and shared stories. Mike felt happy to be part of a community that cared. One evening, as the sun set, the lake protectors held a small celebration by the lake. People sang songs, told stories, and watched the stars appear one by one. Mike looked around and saw smiles everywhere. The lake reflected the sky like a mirror, calm and bright. He thought about the long journey from the day he got that $3,500 fishing fine to this moment of peace. Mike knew that challenges would come again. But now, he was ready. Not just for himself, but for everyone who loved this place. Because the lake was more than water and land. It was a symbol of hope, community, and courage. And as long as they stood together, nothing could take that away. With the dam now owned by the community, life around the lake began to change in wonderful ways. The lake had become more than just a place to fish or swim, it had turned into the heart of the neighborhood. Mike felt proud every time he walked along the shore. He saw families laughing, children playing, and neighbors helping one another. The lake was alive with joy again. One morning, Mike stood at his front door and watched as neighbors gathered to clean the shoreline. Even Cheryl, the former HOA president, was there, carrying a trash bag and smiling. "This looks different from before," Cheryl said, nodding at the clean lake. Mike smiled. "It is. We're doing this together." Cheryl laughed softly. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we listened." The community held regular meetings now, but they were very different from the tense gatherings of the past. People shared ideas and made decisions as a team. The lake protectors, with Mike and Susan leading, worked to keep everyone involved. One important rule was simple: respect for the lake and each other. The neighbors agreed to protect the water, plants, and animals. They promised to keep the lake clean and safe for future generations. Mike thought about the hard times they had gone through, the fines, the arguments, and the battles. But those struggles had made the community stronger. One afternoon, a young couple, Maria and John, moved into the neighborhood. They brought their small daughter, Lily, who loved to run by the water and watch the ducks. Mike invited them to join the next community picnic. Maria smiled and said, "We're happy to be here. This lake feels special." As the picnic day arrived, the whole neighborhood gathered with food, music, and laughter. Children ran around playing games while adults talked and shared stories. Mike looked around and felt a deep sense of belonging. The lake was no longer just his or the HOA's, it belonged to all of them. That evening, after the picnic, Mike sat by the lake with Susan. The sky was painted with pink and orange colors as the sun set. "We did it," Susan said quietly. "We turned things around." Mike nodded. "It wasn't easy, but we never gave up." Susan smiled. "This is just the beginning." Mike looked at the calm water. "The lake brought us together. It made us a real community." Weeks later, Mike received a letter from the local newspaper. They wanted to write a story about the neighborhood's journey, the fight against the unfair fine, the struggle with the HOA, and the purchase of the dam. Mike thought about the story. It was more than just about the lake, it was about people standing up for what was right. The newspaper article was published with photos of smiling neighbors and the beautiful lake. It inspired other communities facing similar challenges. Mike felt proud that their small neighborhood had made a difference. One morning, Mike woke up early and walked to the lake. The water was smooth like glass. Birds sang softly, and a gentle breeze moved the leaves. He took out his fishing rod and cast his line, feeling peaceful. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him. "Mind if I join you?" It was Tommy, the little boy Mike had taught to fish months ago. "Of course," Mike said, smiling. They sat quietly, fishing side by side. Tommy looked up at Mike. "Thank you for teaching me. I love this lake." Mike smiled warmly. "It's my pleasure, Tommy. This lake is for everyone." As the seasons changed, the neighborhood grew closer. They celebrated holidays by the lake, helped each other in hard times, and shared in everyday moments. Mike knew that the fight they had fought was important, but what mattered most was the future they were building together. The lake was a symbol of their unity, strength, and hope. And no matter what challenges came, they would face them as one. Because they were more than neighbors. They were a family.